Hi guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. Welcome to the Rad Season show. I'm super excited to be joined today by business and marketing consultant and the founder of Mosaic Sports Management, Izzo.
Hello, Ollie. Thank you for having me.
How are you, Sue?
I'm so good. I'm really excited to be here.
Good stuff. And whereabouts are you at the moment?
I am in Encinitas, California, the hub of action sports in North County. Yeah, so I've been here about I don't even know how many years now, like 17 or 18 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And how's everything been?
Super good. I've just been cruising here, enjoying the cooler weather and, working on the Sports Management Mastermind and my business clients and enjoying the weather outside, being outside a lot lately. So I'm loving it.
Nice. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to kind of jump straight back in
Sure.
into kind of like where it all began. And I'm super curious of your journey within action sports.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, before the sort of sports management kind of started, before you started your own business, like what kind of struck the interest and what got you involved?
Sure. It's kind of a funny story. So I come from a long line of Italians and I played tennis growing up. I was, totally into sports. And when I was getting ready to go to college, my mother, I had mono. I remember my senior year of high school, I had mono. I was super sick. And I remember like getting accepted to a bunch of colleges and my mom like being in my hospital room being like, okay, which college do you want to go to? And I was like, Mom, I don't even care. And she was just like, okay, she like literally chose St. Mike's for me in Vermont. And, unbeknownst to me, I showed up to the first day of school in university and I went to go check my major and they're like, oh, you're already declared. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm declared? Like I wanted to be like an English and philosophy major. My mother had chosen elementary education for me because
You're kidding. So she signed you up like without.
Oh, she fully signed me up because in her mind, as an Italian woman, you could be a school teacher, you could be a secretary, or you could be a stay-at-home mother. So those were my options in her eyes. So she chose, me being a teacher because she said when you got married, and had kids, you'd have the summers off. But I still only have hairless dogs, no kids, and no husband. So that really didn't work out for me. And I became a sports agent. So when I got to Vermont, lo and behold, I ended up meeting a snowboarder by the name of Randy Gaetano, one of the first days of college, and fell in love. And he kind of exposed me to the world of snowboarding. I really didn't know much about it at that time. And so he was sponsored by Burton, and they were based in Burlington. And so I was kind of brought into that whole world at that point. So that was kind of like step one of how it all started happening.
And then did you get into snowboarding and you were kind of?
Yes. So yeah, I was playing tennis in college but due to knee injuries, like I had to give it up. And Randy and I were dating and I was super in love. And then we broke up and I was just trying to figure out being like a, vindictive Italian, in Leo, I was trying to figure out how to get back at him. So I had one of his best friends, Vin Lavecchia, who is just an OG in the industry, teach me how to snowboard. So really just out of spite to get back at him. So then I learned how to snowboard. And then I thought, what's the next best way to get back at him? And that was to get a job at Burton, where he was sponsored. And so I got a job in the shop selling snowboards. And so that's the truth. That's how I really got into this. So, and I always acknowledge Randy. I mean, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have had the career I had. And I love him to death. He's a wonderful person.
And was that then, so like after that, like after the shop, did you then finish university and that's before you got into, and then went into research?
Yeah. So what happened was while I was working at Burton, this was back in 93 when I got my job at Burton. And so while I was there, I started getting exposed to the marketing department and I didn't really know a ton about marketing. And so that was kind of where like my interest started, going towards. I mean, I was good at sales. I loved, I had a big mouth, so PR, and then like learning about marketing. And so as I was finishing university, I was just learning a lot at Burton. And my life actually became more Burton than it did school. I really did not have I didn't have the typical college experience where I was like partying with everybody at college. I was hanging with everybody at Burton.
Okay.
And so that really became my life, and I loved it. And so then I graduated school and stayed in Burlington for another year. I went from working in the shop to like receptionist and working in like special projects for Burton. And that was really cool because I got to work on the development of Red, which was like their, accessories brand. And I got to work with Donna. I was able to work with Donna Carpenter, Jake's wife, on some legal stuff, which was very cool. And that kind of opened my eyes to like the legal world. And so it was a great kind of time to be exposed to different areas of the business and of sports and of Burton. And I always had an affinity towards the sports marketing department. I kept getting in trouble because I'd go like leave my desk and go hang out back there. So then after a year of being there, I ended up leaving Burton and going back to Connecticut, where I'm from, and landed a job with a sports marketing, youth marketing company. And that's when
And how was that? Like, what were you doing there?
That was a really crazy, interesting job. So the company is called ICR, Integrated Corporate Relations, and they're the ones that brought like BMG Music and Quicksilver and they brought all these companies public. So so they had like Vans and Jones Soda, BMG, Quicksilver. And so what they did was that all these companies put us on the road in an RV to travel to about 42 different states over the course of 8 months. And we were to go talk to kids ages 10 to 21 about trends. So the music they listened to, sports they were playing, brands they loved, all of that. And we were having these kids like fill out surveys. And then we'd have to go back to Wall Street and report to these brands like, hey, this is what's going on with kids. This is what they're into. At that time, it was still extreme sports. And that's where I started being like, okay, so you need to connect your brand with a snowboarder or with a surfer or with a skater, like that sort of thing. And then there happened to be a sports agent that worked in that company. His name's John Flanagan. He has since passed, but he represented Andy McDonald at the time. And so John was like, hey, what you're doing of connecting your friends with these brands, that's being a sports agent. And I didn't know anything about it. And so he took me under his wing after my youth market research job kind of finished, after we were done after the 8 months, and taught me kind of sports management 101. And within like 4 months of working with him, he was like, listen, you really should do this. He's like, we're not growing the company, but I can help guide you, in doing this. And so he helped me with my first deal, which was with Sobe Beverages. And that was for Keir Dillon back in 1999. And that's kind of how it all began.
And how did you sort of approach setting it up? I mean, did you just then like call Keir like out of the blue and say, like, is anyone like, can I represent you? And sort of went that way?
Yes. So, again, it was really early on with agents. And so I had met obviously a ton of riders by working at Burton, and Kerr was one of them. And to kind of go back a little bit, before I ever became an agent, I was into photojournalism. So I started down the road of shooting photos and writing for like Eastern Border and The Fridge and like all these different magazines. And so I would go to Okemo and shoot Keir and like Luke Winan and all these like OG guys from the East Coast riders. Yeah. So I had a relationship with them. So the first athlete I called when I decided, I was going to pursue this was Abe Teeter, and he didn't answer the phone. And Abe was a big deal at that time. And then the second person I called was Keir, and he answered. And I was just like, hey, would you give me a chance to try to get you some deals? And so, so that was kind of, he said, sure. And, I had to go down to Pennsylvania and meet his dad, which was pretty darn intimidating. Jerry was no joke. And, sell myself to his dad. And then they gave me my first shot. So he was the first client I ever signed.
Awesome. And Keir was telling me like he's been on the show, and he told me a story of how there was a bit of an endorsement deal with some TV appearances when he was on Fuel.
Yes.
Which is pretty interesting. And was that you that set that all up? That was your
yes. Yeah. I mean, this was like a perfect example of, kind of ego over, math is what I say. At the time I had gone in, Kerr was with Burton, and I went in and kind of just showed them the math of how much money Kerr made in incentives the year before, and said, hey, listen, you should pay him, this 6-figure amount. And they point blank said to me, they're like, he's not worth that. And I'm like, but this is how much he made, and they just were like, no, he's not worth that. And I was like, all right. So I realized early on, Kerr was really good in front of the camera. So I got him a coach, a television host, like coach up in LA, and had him really started working on that. And so, we developed a really great relationship with the guys at Fuel and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that whole thing. And I realized that if I could, help pitch and create, shows with Kerr, then this whole incentive program that I created in his contract, we could make way more than the amount of money I originally asked for. And that's kind of how, I did the negotiation. I just kind of played a little bit dumb with them and just said, okay, yeah, you're right. He's not worth that money. So let's negotiate this incentive package. So every time he's on television, you pay him this much or this much, that sort of thing. And so I focused on what I could control, and I knew that I could produce the TV shows and make that money. And we made 4 times the amount of the original number that I asked for.
That's amazing, because would it previously just have been sort of magazines and video parts and things like that, where would be like the kind of traditional sort of
the incentive packages were made up of like your video part, the magazines, and then TV, like, because it was like kind of like the contest kids, when you would be on the Grand Prix on NBC, that sort of thing. And then there were the Fuel appearances and different programs like that.
And then how did it work with, I guess, representing different athletes? Did you sort of focus on snow to begin with? What did you do?
So I started off in snow because that's what I knew. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine out here in California who said, hey, I have a friend who's a surfer and she definitely needs help. And I didn't know anything about surfing. And so had a very honest conversation about that with her. One of the interesting things that happened early on in my career, the company that I worked for, the ICR, the Youth Market Research branch of that company, one of the companies they brought public was Quicksilver. So they would have these like what they called the exchange, where they'd bring in all the companies that they worked with for this like kind of conference. So Bob McKnight came to that one year, and it was really funny. There was like a raffle that happened at this event, and I won a package of like watches. And then this other guy who was like a total like suit and tie guy from New York City, who had like zero surfing, skateboarding, snowboarding like about him, won a package of Quicksilver wetsuits. So I went up to him at the exchange and I'm like, hey, listen, like I could tell that you don't surf. So, but I do. I'm like, how about I give you my package of watches and you give me your wetsuit package, right? And the guy was like, no, I'm going to keep it. And I didn't know who Bob was. And Bob was standing right there. So Bob walked up to me and he's like, hi, I can get you some wetsuits. And I'm like, you can? Like all excited, like not even knowing who I was talking to. And so I quickly became friends with Bob. And when I got into sports management and then ultimately moved to California, Bob was really gracious to me from the get-go. I mean, amazing. And he kind of was like, listen, Quicksilver's like, if you need a conference room, like you can come use a conference room. Like he was really amazing. So as I took on this first surfer, I really I moved to California and immersed myself into the surf industry, and Bob made some great introductions for me. And I quickly met Fernando Aguirre, from the founder of Reef, who's a dear, dear friend, and I admire so much. And he was also incredibly gracious to me. And, I just, like I said, I really threw myself into the surf culture and world. So that was the first that was when I first got into surf, was back then. So yeah.
Yes. And how was that? I mean, that was kind of like, I mean, the sort of the nature of the industry, especially back then,
Yes.
you know, it's a pretty kind of macho world, and yeah, a lot of egos involved, and quite cliquey. And so, I mean, how did you like?
How did it start?
Yeah.
So I had a few female surfers to begin with. So I started representing, first it was Jody Nelson, and then it was Sofia Mulanovich, and then it was Cassia Metter. So I was very fortunate that I had a great relationship with Quicksilver and Roxy. And so that's kind of where it all started. When you sign one Peruvian surfer that ends up being a world champion and changing the trajectory in surfing in South America, you end up getting becoming an agent for every single Peruvian surfer, which was like kind of what happened by default. So then I started representing Gabriel Villaran and Cristobal de Cole. So then that kind of opened up the representing male surfers. Okay. And then, I worked with Ian Walsh for a hot minute, and then we signed Chippa Wilson and Josh Kerr. So then it started evolving into more of the male surfers. I mean, the thing with it was, I was at every single event, so I was, a mainstay there. So it was easy, that's where I started developing relationships within that. I mean, some brands, I remember back in the day, Hurley, and I don't know if they still have this stance, but Hurley was just like, we don't deal with agents. And I was like, oh, all right, that's interesting, cool, good on you, but then you worked with other brands like Quick or Rip Curl, and and they all were, pretty decent to work with. It was always a challenge. I mean, it was always a challenge with male ego, that across the board. And the surf culture, as well. I mean, I think that, and here's the thing, we were all coming up and kind of not making it up as we went along, but we were all just in it in the early stages. Right. Yeah. And a lot of these guys, I was trained with my negotiations by attorneys and, all of that. But a lot of these guys were team riders that were then put into these positions of team managers and directors and all of that. And so, I feel like there was a lack of formal training of, how to do business. Yeah. And I feel that everybody should have that, not just in action sports. I mean, I think whenever you're growing, I think management training is really important to understand. And it was a culture that was kind of, like I said, it was on the rise and just, crystallizing. So yeah, it was an interesting time for certain. Some relationships are great. Some were a struggle and a beating.
And I mean, when Sofia won in 2014, I mean, did that just open up the floodgates, not only in Peru, but like South America for brands, and then just the interest in the sport? And
yeah, it was 2006 when she won the title. Yeah, it was, nothing could have prepared me for it. Nothing. Yeah. I mean, I don't think, she, surfing back then, surfing had a reputation in Peru that it was just for like druggies and the whole 9 yards. The country didn't pay much attention to it. It was actually frowned upon, if anything, if you were a surfer. Her parents were kind of renegades in a way, because usually everybody lived in Lima, and her parents early on went and moved to Punta Hermosa, which is considered a summer town, and they lived there year round. So Sofia was raised, and her two brothers were raised surfing all the time. I adore her parents, Ines and Herbert. And the family is amazing. And so here's this young girl who actually almost gave up before she won the title, because 9/11 happened, and she was just on the cusp of qualifying for the CT. And because of 9/11, they canceled events. And so she had to do a whole nother year to try to qualify. And so she did ultimately qualify. And then it was like, she just started winning like CT events. And then the next thing you know, we're in a title contention up against Lane Beachley, who was the 6-time world champ at the time. And Lane's gnarly. And and Sofia's like, just this humble, sweet girl. And we were watching, at that time, there were about 12 daily newspapers in Peru. And we started seeing like this tidal wave of like coverage. Like all of a sudden, like the papers are covering Sofia, and then, you know, she's coming home and there's like we had to hire a press person because there were like tons of cameras and press, and we're like, what the hell is happening? And so I think it was such a beautiful moment for the country and for Sofia and for surfers in general and young people in the country, because Peru didn't have a lot to celebrate. You know, they didn't have big icons in sports. And so here was this young girl who all of a sudden was bringing, you know, a spotlight on Peru in this global stage of surfing, in a culture that loves surfing and has amazing surf. And so it became this, I mean, I always describe it as like Michael Jordan meets Evita. I mean, that's like how I can describe it. I mean, when we came off that plane from Hawaii after she won the title, I mean, it was a moment of like almost fearing for our lives. There were so many people at the airport. This
was in Lima, right? So we like you sort of landed and there's just like crowd of people waiting in the airport.
Well, we landed and then they called us off the plane and because we had our film crew with us, they called us off the plane ahead of everybody and brought us to this like special section of the airport where like only diplomats are. And there's like, they're there with like this reception with like pisco sours for us and all these dignitaries congratulating her. And we're all looking at each other like, what the hell is going on? And then all of a sudden they bring us out to the front of the airport and it was just a sea of people. And it was like, wow. Holy shit, you know. Here's the thing though, that like the other part that was crazy about this is that Sofia all of a sudden became this massive celebrity, but with that comes a little bit of danger too, because then she's perceived as having a lot of money. So there was like a couple moments where we were like, had to kind of hide her because of kidnapping threats and
wow.
So like it was an adjustment. And it was a lot for her. It was a lot to go from kind of obscurity to this massive celebrity. And she handled it, you know, with grace. And, you know, I'm so proud of her and what she propelled in the country and for South American surfers. Cause now you see it. I mean, like, I love seeing all the Brazilians and, you know, every time there's a South American champion or any South American winning, I'm like, yeah, cause I just love the passion of this country's.
Yeah. And it's almost kind of taken on from sort of soccer as well in Brazil, like as a number one sport, and then kind of surfing as kind of sort of number two, but like closely behind it. And it's good to see. And I mean, with that then, did you sort of think, okay, like there's definitely sort of possibilities now of, you know, having sort of different endorsements, different brands doing different things and projects, maybe like, I don't know, kind of things sort of outside of the core sort of sport and kind of the traditional methods of how it's been done before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love marketing, and that was kind of, and I think that was probably like the best part of sports management for me was the athlete brand, right? And how do we build the athlete brand? How do we connect, you know, that with fans and make, you know, them excited about the athlete outside of their sport? So that's where, you know, with Sofia, I mean, I didn't know anything about making documentaries, but I was like, we got to capture this. And I just was like, we got to make a documentary. And everybody was like, what? I'm like, no, we're doing this. And, you know, that was kind of my first step into entertainment and like creating an entertainment property. And then with Sofia, it was like, okay, well, we have licensing opportunities here to create a brand in Peru, you know, so there was that part. And then, you know, with her too was like the nonprofit events and doing community events there. And so that's what I really loved, that part of it, and seeing it outside of just the action sports and the way too is like it added value, right, to the endemic brands when you had these bigger projects outside of that. But it came down, I always wanted it to be true to who the athlete was and what they were passionate about. I learned the hard way, like many agents, when you try to manufacture something and it just blows up in your face because it's not authentic. So, you know, really looking at what the athlete was about and what they cared about, and then creating projects around that. Yeah.
And like now looking back, like what do you think you most enjoyed about working with the athletes?
You know, honestly, it's the same thing that I love about working with like my business clients. You know, I always believed you have to be the best person in order to be the best professional. And so help cultivating them as a person was literally my favorite part. I mean, I feel that if anything, I was their biggest cheerleader, and I could see what they were capable of, way before they could see it. So, that part I loved. I always had, like I always said, like, never had my own kids, but I had about 17 of them, in my sports management career, raising them, I really felt an obligation to their parents to make sure that, they had some skill sets and that they were going to be able to carry past this career. So honestly, like, that part was my favorite. I think there were other agents that loved, the deal, and I love contracts and doing deals, but I really, the person was number one, creating the marketing initiatives that were, athlete brand building. Like, that was probably number two, that stuff. Yeah. That's what I loved. It was really about the person.
Yeah. And having that many athletes, and I guess you're kind of always on. I mean, how did the stress and kind of, it's constant ups and downs, right? And sort of looking at some are doing okay, some aren't, and obviously, and some major things happening. And that was
oof, gosh, yeah. So it was interesting. I mean, like, I've said it before, where, other agents worked for companies, so they didn't have to shoulder the same amount of responsibility and pressure that I did by owning the company. So there was that pressure. The other thing is that you're in the business of human beings, and human beings make really stupid mistakes sometimes. So, you could have a lot riding with an athlete, and then all of a sudden they get injured, and then it's all on the line. Or they make a poor decision, So the other part too for me was that my whole life was my company. I had nothing else. And that was my own doing, I didn't have a family. I didn't have any other balance. It was my entire identity, self-worth was tied in direct relation to the way that my company was doing, the way my athletes were performing, if the deals that they got, which is so unhealthy, which is why I'm such an advocate about the "I'll be happy when" concept. Or not an advocate, but anti-advocate of that. And so that led to a slippery slope. It was really, what was happening was that when business was good, I was good. And then when bad things were happening, I would start stacking all the bad things that happened. And I started just shredding myself. And it was something that I think a lot of people can relate to when they tie their self-worth to the outcomes of whether it be their profession, their personal life, or whatever it is, right? It was, so I got myself into a lot of trouble emotionally and mentally because of that. And it was a really long, hard journey, and a lot of lessons to learn in that.
And do you think it was just too many things stacking up, like you were saying, right? It's kind of,
there was, here's the thing. Like, I think all of us, like, you have your childhood stuff, right? Which there was plenty of. And then for me, and then, you have your business life and your personal life. And so in my business life, I had started Mosaic in 99, and, things were going really well. And then, 2003 hit, and, Craig Kelly was a dear friend of mine. And all of a sudden, I find out, he passed away in an avalanche, and I was just devastated. I mean, I just lost someone that I was so close with. And then not even, I don't even think it was 30 days later, Jeffy Anderson was my athlete, and Jeffy and I were really close, and I loved him so much. And then he passed away in Japan. And so it was like this 1-2 punch of loss that I didn't even know I was going to get through. And then, you fast forward, and then in between there is like, it's a grind, right? Like, female agent just trying to build this company, the whole 9 yards, total grind. And then fast forward, and you get to 2009, and Kevin Pearce, who, again, extremely close with, and he's practicing, for Olympic qualifiers, and suffers a traumatic brain injury. And I literally left my office and got on an airplane with nothing and just flew straight to Utah, and got there ahead of his family, and was just like, calling them being like, you need to tell Jake you need the jet because you need to get here like right now. You can't wait for a commercial flight. And then, you know, with Kevin, I'm not even aware if Kevin's going to live or die. You know, he's in this induced coma and it's the worst thing ever. And then I come home, I leave, I come back here because we're in the middle of Olympic trials and the Pearces were like, you got to get back to the other athletes. They literally kicked me out of the hospital. And then I get a phone call, not even 17 days later, that Danny Davis, you know, is in the hospital. They tell me his broken leg, that he drove an ATV into a fence and he has broken leg. And then the next thing you know, I'm on another plane back to Utah and it's not a broken leg. You know, he's like pretty much his spine and his pelvis is like broken from the ATV accident. And then I don't know if Danny's going to walk again. So I mean, like, so it was like, again, like there was such heavy shit that went down and injuries and stuff that was so far out of my control. But I had felt, I love these kids so much and these people so much that these traumas were just so personal to me.
Yeah.
And, in all that, there's that part of it of your deep love for these people, but then you have to shift gears and you have to hang up the personal hat and then you got to put on a business hat because you have to sit there and talk to the sponsors about their contracts and you have to take the personal almost out of it and be like, no, you need to still pay him because he's going to have medical bills. Like, and then they're, you know, so there was like this really like almost schizophrenic, like split mind that I had to have of, like, and I wasn't good at it. I really wasn't good at it because it was so personal to me. So that stuff really stacked up inside of me, no matter how much I got through it or persevered through it or rebuilt the business after these things, like, you know, going from like the agent being featured in Sports Business Journal as one to watch to, you know, and being like the one that like, you know, Vancouver Olympics, my athletes were going to win it and steal the gold from said redhead, you know, like all of that stuff to like everything in fucking shambles and not knowing if one athlete's going to live and if the other one's going to walk, you know?
Wow.
So that stuff just became like a lot inside of me. Because all the while, you know, I had to continue building a business and taking care of other athletes and parents and sponsors and all of that. So it was a lot.
Wow. And then did you, I mean, that was going on presumably for years as well, right? Before you ended up selling the company. Yeah.
So it was funny. I mean, it's ironic that I had an opportunity to sell right before Kevin got injured to Octagon.
Okay.
And my ego was like, no, I'm not going to do it because, you know, I think I can build this further and I'm about to have an athlete sweep and I'll, you know, get a better deal after this, you know? And so I didn't take the deal. And then in 2015, Octagon wanted to build out their surf program. And so it was a good opportunity. I had also kind of saw the writing on the wall with kind of the action sports industry and the deals drying up a bit.
Yeah.
And then there was also major burnout for me. I would say like I really lost my passion, you know, the last 2 years of my career. I felt that, you know, I was really, as a sports agent, you know, your job is for the athlete and getting them everything that you can get them and fighting the fight for them. But you also get beat up a little bit by both sides, both the athlete side and the sponsor side, because with athletes, especially when they're winning and they're a hot commodity, you know, you always have agents or other people telling them, oh, your agent's not doing this. You should have this. You should have that. So you get a little bit of like, you know, which is, I get it. Athletes are like, why haven't you done that for me? And then you are on the phone with the sponsors and you got the sponsors being like, well, why isn't the athlete doing this? And so you're kind of in the middle sometimes, and sometimes it's fine. Sometimes it's a beating, you know?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, a 17-year career was just starting to weigh on me a little bit. And, you know, the coat of armor that you had to kind of develop to do this job, you know, you had to be tough all the time. And not like aggro tough, but like, you know, you're taking some hits and you're in a constant, like, you know, hustle, I think, with this job. And so that started just to really, I think, wear on me. and my mental health was not good. I was really, my self-loathing was just increasing, and I just didn't have it in me anymore to like keep doing it. I felt that I was just not happy, and I wasn't. It was just, I was going in a bad direction. So I had that opportunity again in 2015. So I felt that the stars aligned for me to be like, okay, yeah, I'm done. Let's pull the plug on this one.
And you were also working on Frends as well, on the headphones, and which is a whole another another story, right?
Totally. Yeah. So, at the time, I had Danny and Jack Matrani and Luke Matrani and Kevin Pearce. The only ones I didn't represent was Mason and Scotty Lago. And so, and Kerr, I had Kerr. And so we all had gotten together when the boys were in their prime, and we saw like this massive following with the Frends crew, and decided like, let's make a product, let's build something. And so we had started Frends, the headphone company. And, that was a journey, like, in and of itself. And, that was interesting. A bunch of 17-year-old kids, with Kerr leading the charge, and some other advisors. And at a time where headphones became, one of the hottest products. So though we had the right idea, the competition, it was we just got crushed in like with the Skull Candies of the world. And I mean, everybody and their mother started making headphones in the same price point that we did. So it was pretty interesting, but it was fun. I mean, it was fun for a hot minute, and it was cool. It was cool to see the boys, get excited about something and put their heart into it. And it went awry, to say the least, as if you listen to Kerr's episode. But it was an interesting endeavor.
Yeah. And what did you do then? So when you did have that time off, when you sold, what was the next step? What were you kind of, were just like, okay, I'm done for the time being with it, and I kind of just want, I want some time for myself, really, because you kind of looking after all these athletes for a while. And
so what happened was, originally the first part of the sale was the merge was I merged Mosaic, the surf, and part of the snow program with Octagon, but Octagon offered me a position to come on board with them full time, but I didn't want to do that. So I just had a partnership with them, but I kept Danny and Jack. Okay. And so those were the two that I was like, I still want to do this, but I just don't want to have the whole company anymore. Yeah. So I'll just represent those guys. Within the 5-month period of making the sale, I think it was in May, and then in September of that year of 15, I found a lump in my breast and was like, wait a minute, like, what's that? And was diagnosed with breast cancer. So this whole idea of like taking it easy and all that, like, I thought by selling the company, the majority of it, that I would slow down with just Danny and Jack, but it was no different. I was still going at the same pace and unhealthy. And then I got diagnosed with cancer, and sat down with Danny and Jack, and really Danny at that point. Jack had decided to go with another agent, not because I had cancer, just parting of the ways, which was totally cool. And then sat down with Danny and his mom, and I told them and gave them the same opportunity to leave. I'm like, listen, I gotta deal with this. I was pretty upset, and they were wonderful, of course, and they were like, no, we're going to stay with you. And so I continued to work with Danny for that year while I was going through treatment. And that was probably a dumb idea. I probably should have just said no and cut it loose at that point, because I felt like throughout my treatment, I was so sick, but I was so worried about losing Danny. And I was so like trying to still produce Peace Park. And, I tried to go to X Games that year. And I just, my focus was partially on healing, but a lot on like not losing my client, and that was just plain stupid. I should have just pulled the ripcord and just focused on getting healthy. Danny was wonderful, and but it wasn't the ending of a career that I probably would have wanted. It was, I think we wrapped up. It was okay, but it just didn't end ideally the way that I would have liked it to have wrapped up.
And I mean, then like sort of when you were going through treatment, were you thinking like, and then sort of when you finished with Danny and with the athletes, that was sort of, you thought like, you still got this passion for marketing and for business, and you kind of wanted to kind of continue that, but not necessarily sort of within the confinements of the whole kind of action sports world, right?
Yeah. So I really, I did. I shut the door on a 17-year, 18-year career. And I had met some friends when I went on my like Eat, Pray, Love trip to Bali some years prior. My friends, Francisca Izzo and Christo Hall, they owned a small business marketing company in Australia out of Narrabeen. And we became fast friends. And they always said to me, they're like, oh, when you sell your company, we want you to work with us. And because I love marketing. And so when I sold finally and got out of the game and recovered, they hit me up and they're like, okay, we're flying you to Australia. We want you to come here for 10 days and check out what we do and see if you'll bring it to the States. And so went down there and checked out their program, which they teach like a 3-hour introductory marketing class for business owners. And then they have a 11-month mastermind program, which goes through about 30 different modules of marketing, teaching small businesses how to market themselves and build their brand and all of that. And so I made the decision to join them, and I didn't really have a minute to think about, closing the door on sports management. I just kind of jumped into this next thing and started teaching and traveling to like Seattle, San Francisco, LA, Texas, and hosting these seminars and these masterminds. And I loved it. I mean, it was so cool to sit down and work with every single type of small business owner you can imagine, and come up with really fun, great marketing ideas and teaching them about funnels and opt-ins and their uniqueness and taglines. And so I did that for about 2 years for those guys. And I learned a ton. And in that, what happened was too, they were like, okay, we need you to speak at a conference. And now I had been behind the camera, and I made it a point of being behind the camera for 20 years. And like, there's very few photos of me in action sports events or video, and for a reason. And then all of a sudden, the first speaking gig I had to do for these guys was in front of 150 people. And I had never been on a stage in my life. And I was like, well, I guess we're doing this. So, there I am, like at this marketing conference, like coming out dancing to Dolly Parton 9 to 5 and giving like a 45-minute presentation on marketing and like what you want to be known for. And that was great because it launched my speaking career and my passion for speaking. And so a lot came out of those 2 years was working with them. And I learned a ton. I really am grateful to Francisca and Christo for that. And their company is called Basic Bananas. You could check them out. And so then after 2 years with them, I decided there was other aspects of small business that I was interested in. A lot of that being mindset. Because I understood as a business owner, like being under my desk every quarter, rocking back and forth, being like, how am I going to pull this off? And so I really wanted to, when I worked with business clients, I wanted to be able to, just like with the athletes, help them be the best person in order to be the best professional, because I sacrificed happiness and my self-worth, how screwed up that was, with just a sole focus on being successful. And so I felt if I were going to work with business owners, then I wanted to make sure that we grew happiness alongside of success, that they had to grow together. And then really helping them understand like growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And, just how to, I just pretty much, I'm a walking cautionary tale, and I want to help everybody avoid doing all the things I did that landed me in a massive depressive state for years. So, yeah.
And would you say there's some kind of like similarity then in now between the business owners and the athletes, and it's sort of lessons learned, right, from all like from those years?
So much. I mean, I think that, I like with athletes, like I always talk about, when young athletes are the hunters, right? They're going for their first win and they can't wait to get it. And then all of a sudden they're on the podium and they become the shit. And then it's like they go from being the hunter to the hunted, right? And they're expected to repeat this success over and over. And what happens is they're handed like the keys to the castle, where they're like, you're amazing, right? And they're like, oh my God, everybody loves me. I'm the best. I'm the best when I win. If I win, I'm worthy, right? And it's no different than business owners. It's like, it's kind of like the whole sophomore year. Like I felt it with Mosaic. Like I built a successful company. So how was I going to back it up with a second successful company? Right. And that pressure. And so, you know, some of those cautionary tales of that, I think also too, like joy, you know, we start off as these individuals, as young people, and we know what brings us happiness, whether it's kicking a soccer ball or playing tennis or skateboarding, whatever it is. And then we take on these roles of, you know, business owner or partner, spouse or whatever, or this title or that title. And we start losing like what made us happy in the first place.
Yeah.
And it becomes, you make your life journey becomes about like almost like outcomes or things versus feelings. And we lose sight of like chasing feelings versus chasing outcomes.
Yeah.
And so that I see a lot of similarities, you know, in that as well. And I think at the end of the day, especially in today's society, in this world we live in, it's like, we're all just trying to do the best we can and learning how to, you know, be a little nicer to ourselves with self-compassion in the journey is something that's really important. And so I do see a lot of similarities between the two.
And you're also doing a sports management sort of mastermind course where you've partnered with Cersei Wallace. And that's sort of, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, that's kind of a course to kind of athletes or sort of future athletes and their parents, and sort of helping them kind of manage that journey. Is that?
Yes, 100%. Right? Yeah. So like what happened was I'd come up with an idea that was similar to this. And then Cersei came to me with like another idea. And we were like, you know what, we've been doing this combined together for 40 years. And both of us come from a place, Cersei and I were arch nemesis. Like I love this story. I'll never forget when I signed Danny. Like every agent wanted Danny. And at the time, Cersei was with Octagon. And I remember being at some snowboarding event. And, you know, I was scared shitless of her because we were both alpha females, but like she was from the industry. So she had like that, you know, credibility. And I was this girl from Connecticut. And I remember she like comes up to me and she's standing there maybe with like Peter Carlisle and Bob Klein. And she's like, so you signed Danny Davis? And I was like, yeah, you know, I signed Danny Davis, you know? And it was like, we were like these two females, like alpha females, just like circling each other. And then one day, I think we were invited on a panel together to speak. And it was like, it became like the Cersei and Sue show. And that from that point on, we're like, why aren't we best friends? We're the only two females in this game that like get each other. And so
that's it. You should join powers, right?
Totally. So we became great friends. And then, you know, this past year we teamed up and created the Sports Management Mastermind, which is a 4-week intensive. It's a 90-minute class held virtually. And the whole idea, like you said, is to target young athletes and their families, and sports organizations too that work with young athletes. Okay. And the whole idea is, you know, we understand, nobody understands better than us than the road to navigate, like the roadmap to become a sponsored athlete, to build an athlete brand, how to build a career successfully in action sports, and how to, what parents can do to help them in a positive way, and what parents should not do that can really hurt their child in the long term, and the relationships they have with sponsors. So we created this 4-week curriculum where we go through everything from, building your athlete brand, mindset, mental strength and performance, contract negotiations, social media, and cover everything that we feel is really important for young athletes to know and learn as they want to, go for sponsorship or go the road of X Games or WSL or whatever, Olympics, whatever path. So it's amazing. I mean, the feedback we had after our first one in April was incredible. We're launching our next one. It starts on October 26th.
Nice.
Yeah, so you can sign up, and it's pretty cool too because the guest speakers we have been amazing. So it's people that like, Todd Jacobs, who was like the mental coach and mentor for like Travis Pastrana, Paul Rodriguez, Jagger Eaton, even Kevin Pearce. Like he comes on, and Tiffany Cook, who has done social media for Travis Rice, and she works directly with Lance Armstrong. Like she does the social class, which is incredible, and then we have a slew of brand people that come on that really break down like what brands look for. So between mine and Circe's experience and our guest speakers, I feel like the value we give is something that, you just wouldn't get. Any kid just can't walk in and get this information. So and we love it. I mean, we just love giving back in this way. It's incredible.
Nice. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way of getting in contact?
Sure. You can find me across every single piece of social media at Sue Izzo. That's Izzo. Or just shoot me an email at sue@sueizzo.com. And yeah, I'm happy to give back and lend a hand and, be supportive.
Nice. Cool. Sue, thanks so much for your time. It's been amazing hearing your stories and your journey. And yeah, really appreciate you opening up. And it's I hope everything goes well with the course. And yeah, sounds pretty exciting, and it should be, anyone that is an athlete and wants to get involved, then I should definitely jump on.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Ollie. I greatly appreciate it.
No worries. Ciao.